I apologize for the delay, everyone. Hold on a minute. I'm going to get my cameraman to go and take a look at this and see if it's all good. Handsome, could you come and look in the camera and see that everything looks good? Yep. Okay. So hopefully it's live. I need you to look in both of these screens and make sure that everything looks good. Okay.
You want that one to be able to see your hands?
Yes.
This way, just.
Okay, so everyone, hopefully you can hear me.
Look at that.
Okay, great. We're trying something new tonight. I am collabing with myself so that you have one screen. One half of the screen is my hands sewing, and the other half is a straight on ahead looking at me. And hopefully there will also be sound. So if you have any questions, if you want to chat about anything, please drop it in the chat and I will respond to it because I have 3 screens, the magic of modern technology. Tonight I am focusing on finishing up this man, I have a lot of hard luck dresses. I seem to be the common thread there. I wonder if I'm the issue. Nah. So this is the silk damask Jornea that was BP'd upon by my kitten. Thankfully, she is an immature kitten, and I don't mean that as I'm not casting aspersions on her young, undeveloped character. I mean that biologically speaking. Her pee literally doesn't stink yet. Isn't that great? So it looks mostly just like a hard water stain, and it doesn't actually smell. And I don't really want to take this to the cleaners until I finish it. And I need to find some scraps so I can test other methods of cleaning the kitty pee out before I do it on the main body of the gown. In the meanwhile, I'm just going to keep on sewing. I'm going to keep on keeping on. So yeah, getting ready for Pennsic. There is sound. Yay! Thank you. Wait, there is sound or there is not sound, I guess is the important question. Should there have been a not there, Maggie? So yeah, getting ready for Pennsic. As usual, I'm behind the power curve because life gets in the way, as it does. It's funny. I realize that a lot of the people who have high output, creative output, they don't do their own cooking, and they don't cook from scratch, and they don't culture their own dairy, and they don't ferment their own stuff, and do their own sourdough. And it never really occurred to me, but doing all that stuff takes up a lot of time and a lot of creative energy. So yeah, if I just didn't care about what I put in my body in terms of food, I would have a much higher creative output on the sewing and crafting front. But I do care about what I put in my body, so there it is. That's on me, though. Yay! You can hear me. So Pennsic is actually only 3 weeks away. Yes, that is true. That is a true statement. It is literally 3 weeks away, which is not that far. And I will be flying in on Korean Air to ultimately ending up in Baltimore and then driving out with my Lord Master Papa. The 6 hours, roughly 6 hours that it is from there, maybe 5 hours if we're lucky, and getting there on the very first Friday, on Lamb Grab Friday. So I will be coming in fully swinging after a 18-hour, 22-hour odyssey just to get from Korea to the US from where I'm staying currently in Korea to the Baltimore, and then a drive after that. So yeah, my internal body clock is going to be all sorts of delightfully distraught. Oh well. Oh, Elizabeth's here. Yay. Thank you, ladies, for joining. If anyone has any questions or comments, just pop them in the chat and I will be keeping my eye on that and responding. I've been working a lot on the project vlogs for the Gamora that I finally finished in January, and I'm just now getting to the finishing up the project vlogs for that. And I've been doing a lot of research to accompany them, and I've been finding out some refreshing things that I knew once upon a time, but I had stored in my dusty long-term memory, and I've been refreshing that memory about 15th century clothing and just finding some really neat information. Well, neat to a fashion history geek like me, I guess, probably my definition of neat, or what counts as neat, isn't the same in everyone's book. But for instance, in 1447, Parenti, who was the scion of a powerful mercantile family in Florence, was betrothed to Caterina Sforza. No, not Sforza, sorry. Caterina Strozzi, also a powerful family, although one that ended up on the wrong side of history, and the sons ended up getting exiled. But the ladies of the house were left in the city. And Caterina Strozzi was engaged to Marco Parenti. And in his ricordanza, which is basically like a family diary that is much less about feelings, in fact, not about feelings at all, and more about the daily happenings in the household, to include major purchases such as clothing. And he records in detail all of the materials that he purchased for a complete ensemble for his soon-to-be bride, including her giornea, her outer garment, her gamora, and her ghirlanda, her headpiece, or not her gamora, sorry, her cotta. And this accounting actually specifically mentions not just the fabrics, but the notions. So it actually talks about the lacing rings for both the front of her gown and the sleeves of the cotta. And he actually ordered 120 gilt large lacing rings for the front of the gown. It specifies for the front of the gown, and 100 small ones for the sleeves. And I was thinking to myself, wow, 100 lacing rings, that's a lot. But then I went and actually looked at how clothes looked in the 1440s, early 1450s in Florence. And if you look at the portraits of ladies from that time, especially young unmarried ladies, you will see that the lacing rings are literally put a budding. There's no gap between the lacing rings. And basically the lace is just like sewing it. It's completely just solid lacing rings all the way down the front. And the opening down the front actually goes pretty far, probably to account for future pregnancy belly. And yeah, when I was counting the number of rings in this painting, I thought to myself, yeah, 120, that seems about the right number. It's a lot of lacing rings to sew onto the front of a gown. So that was a very fascinating moment to kind of combine the visual record and the documentary record, and it made sense. Sometimes the visual record contradicts what is in the documentary record, in which case I trust the documentary record much more than the visual record, but it was nice that they perfectly lined up. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my bodices, the comment for those watching this recording and not seeing the chat, that my bodices, Magdalena says her bodices have 50 or so. Yeah, 50 is still not 120. That's a lot. And that's just one opening. I thought when I first read it, I thought, well, maybe that's to include side lacing, because a lot of gowns in 15th century Italy, you see they have side lacing and front lacing to allow for full flexibility for that pregnancy belly. But it was unusually specific in that it said 120 rings for the front of the gown. So not the side, not the back, the front. So yeah. Yeah, my lacing only goes to my waist as well. The comment is my lacing only goes to my waist. My lacing only goes to my waist as well, which I guess, 50 eyelets to only go to the waist, that's still a lot. But 120 is still, these eyelets are remarkably close. And, if you want a perfectly smooth closure, yeah, put your lacing rings right next to each other, one after the other, and it's like I said, it's basically like sewing the front of your dress up, but with a lace and much less fuss and muss than actually stitching. So I'm thinking that my next cotta, I think I'm actually going to sort of slide to the years of my early youth, shall we say, in my persona as a 15th century Contessa, and I'm going to actually recreate an ensemble from the 1450s, specifically because I actually like the look. And interestingly, clothing gets more conservative and simpler as the 15th, or not simpler, simpler is the wrong word, less ornate, less adorned as the 15th century wears on in Florence, whereas in the earlier part of the century, in mid-century, it's still rather rather chic, shall we say. So I think I might actually go ahead and put together a nice ensemble from the 1450s. The 1450s is also when a lot of the dances I actually do were created. And so that would actually be wearing the really proper clothes for those dances. And so I'll be able to experience those dances in a different way. And I'm excited about that too. Yeah, yeah, we know I'm a geek. Okay, I can hear you all saying it. It's fine. I admit it. I'm a proud geek. Yeah. Yeah. So Magdalena says that she's about to cut the mock-up of a pattern she was sent by a mutual friend of ours who's up in Hamburg. I'll be interested to see how that pattern turns out once you start, actually putting it on your body and fitting it. She's, of course, literally a professional tailor. So, yeah, that will be should be pretty good. I've actually worked with her on patterning, drafting patterning, and fixing patterns and that sort of thing. My arm's eye, she and I were exploring the issues with my arm's eye on my Burgundian gowns about 14 years ago. This was before children for her, and my shoulder is so muscular and my chest is so muscular in that area that it kind of baffled her drafting, the usual drafting math that she would use for that kind of arm's eye, because that's just the shape I am there. So we had to come up with some other solutions to make the arm's eye and sleeve cap fit and move with my musculature, which is very different from, the standard medieval arm's eye drafting math that one would normally apply. Yeah, that's me. Always an outlier. The bell curve is not my chosen place to inhabit in pretty much any area. And that is not a brag, by the way. That is a lament. So I'm just stab stitching the bottom of this blue damask Jornea. I started this over 5 years ago. Little over 5, or maybe almost exactly 5 years ago. And it just kind of, I kept, the pandemic happened, so there was no real need to have any kind of output on clothing for about 2 years. And then other things just kind of took priority. And it's been almost finished for 4 of those 5 years. So I'm actually kind of glad it's taken me this long to get around to finishing it, though, because in the interim, I've had access to some new reports about the extant garments of Diego di Caviglia, a condottiero who died in 1481 in Otranto, actually one of the last crusaders, literally. He died in a crusade against the Turks, who were trying to take over invade Italy through the southernmost part. And he was buried in his garments of life, and those garments included a farsetto, his doublet, and his giornea, the outer garment. And even though the stitches had long since rotted away, because those are usually the first parts to go, all the pieces were there. Most of the pieces were there. Some of the pieces had succumbed to, shall we say, body juices. The front of the garments nearly always survive really well. The back of the garments survive less well in pretty much any given tomb situation. And I think you can understand why. Anyway, so the pieces for his giornea actually show the facing for the neckline of his giornea and how it was finished. And so I was able to apply that to this giornea, the finishing technique on the neckline. So I was really excited about that. And then in the interim, I also discovered a report. I can't believe I got a knot in this really fine silk thread. Now, for those who are watching, you can watch me destroy this silk thread instead of actually successfully getting the knot out. Anyway, there's this Gamora that belonged to the Blessed Osana. She's not a saint, she's an almost saint, as it was a local saint in the Milano part of the greater Duchy of Milano area of Italy. And in her day, she was so revered that the Duke and Duchess of Milano actually went and paid her a visit. And when she died, they attended her funeral. And the gown in which she entered the convent as a 12 or 13-year-old, her Gamora, her childhood, her tween Gamora, basically, it actually survived until she died. And then because she was blessed, they kind of cut up the skirts into pieces so everyone could have a relic of it. But thankfully, and the sleeves, the bodice was intact and the hemline was almost entirely intact. So we could actually see how the hemline of her dress was finished. And I was able to apply that technique to my new gamora. So kind of happy that I took my time on both of those projects because it allowed new information to come to light and for me to apply that. Okay, I give up. I give up on this knot. I'm just going to break the thread and start over, and that's fine. This is actually probably not the right kind of thread. This is actually a very fine silk embroidery thread, Korean embroidery thread. But it's the right color, and it is very pretty. So yeah, that's been my latest research. I'm really hoping to have this done in the next week or so. I really should. It shouldn't take me that long. I've got to finish stab stitching this hemline in the front, and unfortunately, I had already made it pretty far on the front hem of this jornea because I actually would like to go ahead and apply as well the band, the facing that is on Osana's Gamora. Of course, Diego de Cavanilla's Jornea doesn't have a facing. It doesn't need a facing. It only goes to like just above his knees or mid thigh. It's really short, actually. So it doesn't drag on the ground. Whereas Osana's Gamora did trail, not, I mean, it brushed the ground. And so that facing that's on her hemline that protrudes a couple of centimeters beyond the shell of the skirt, that actually takes the damage. And so that's how I'm finishing the back, the train of this, because this gown has a pretty significant train. It's what this bias cut silk band that I've sewn together is. That's going to go in the back. And I think I'm going to apply the same to the front. Now on Osana's gown, the facing is in the same fabric, so it's more of the same as the shell. Whereas when I cut this, I didn't realize that. I wasn't paying close enough attention. So this is actually the lining. I'm not so fastidious that I'm going to dig up some more of this silk damask that I know I have and then cut a bunch of strips of that to do the facing. I'm just going to go ahead and go with this for the facing. And then maybe when this wears away some year, I will replace it with the shell here. We'll see. Yeah. I've been trying to get, I have a whole bunch of new projects I'd like to do, sewing projects, but I have a code. I have developed a code for myself, and my code is I may not start a new project until I've finished at least one of my last projects, and that at any given time, I should have no more than 5 sewing projects afoot, as it were. What I've discovered is if I have too many projects going at once, then I don't get any of them done in a timely fashion because I hand sew everything. And what that means is that by the time I get around to finishing the thing, I've learned so many new things that I no longer agree with my interpretation of that thing, and I just get disillusioned and frustrated. So it really is in my best interest to start and finish things quickly and wear them as soon as possible so that my learning curve doesn't overtake my satisfaction with the state of the art of the garment that I have just created, shall we say, or just finished. That's on me. That's just me. I don't apply those standards to anyone else's creations. This is all just my own self rules. I believe that everyone should be able to choose their level of authenticity and explore history from a hands-on immersive perspective without being judged by other people on their choices and their own, shall we say, level of pain when it comes to the authentic approach to clothing. And the reality is, and I know many of you have heard this before, many of you have heard this before, and then I'll get to the fun comment in the chat. You know, there is no bottom to authenticity. There is no, short of literally traveling back in time to the period in question and being taught by people there and using only materials that existed in that time, there is no bottom to authenticity in recreating historical garments, because you can always, at least if we are in the modern world, take it to the next level, right? Even if you think you've used all medieval materials, have you? The silk, this silk thread that I'm using here, does this come from the cultivar or I don't think call them cultivar, the species, they're living things, or they're animals, not plants. Does this come from the species of silkworm that was used, exact species of silkworm, or plural, one of the species of silkworms that was used in the Middle Ages to create silk? What about the dye stuff? Okay, so let's say we do it. We hand dye it using plant dyes or even animal dyes. Is it the exact same cultivar of Brazil wood that was used to create that red, or madder, or is it a more modern cultivar? Right. So there is literally no bottom to authenticity. You just get to decide what counts for you as authentic enough. Yeah. So that's why it's not just a belief. The reality is that authenticity is on a spectrum, and each group gets to decide, each club gets to decide their own rules, obviously their own standards, and that's totally fair. It's just the judgmentalism that I don't approve of, right? Clubs getting to choose what counts as authentic enough, totally legit. Individuals telling other people they're not authentic because they don't meet their standards, not cool. Okay, cool comment. Referring to the excitement of new projects. The excitement of new projects is so alluring. Yes, it is. And let me tell you, I'm a morning person. So I awaken with a great deal of creative energy, just brimming, right? Actually, energy, full stop. Unfortunately, my pot of energy has been getting more and more limited over the last couple of years because of life circumstances kind of draining me away. So I have a limited energy pie, and that energy pie is not, it's not like there's energy for exercise, energy for creativity, energy. No, no, no. All the energy. And I have a daily workout regimen I have to follow because of the kind of body type I am. Thank you, genetics. And so I really have to make choices about where my energy goes. So I awaken brimming with creative energy, but often I have to make a choice. Okay, well, am I going to get my workout done, or am I going to get work done? Like, am I going to, work on content creation? Am I going to teach classes? Or am I going to work on creating some new garment? Am I going to do research? Actually, thankfully, research doesn't really take a lot of my energy because it's not a physical activity. I usually do most of my research in the evening when I'm just dead exhausted and can barely lift my hands anymore. That's when I actually make some of my most interesting discoveries about historical material culture. So yeah, I do awaken brimming with ideas about all the things I'd like to create, the directions I'd like to go. And, I wish that I had more time on this planet. I really do. I mean, in general, it's like 100 years is not enough for me. That's why I never understand the trope of the bored immortal. It's like, why is the immortal bored? There should be no reason for boredom. The world is full of so many things to experience and learn, and new things, constantly new things to experience and learn. Why would you get bored? I mean, yeah, people are basically the same, but the specifics change. Oh, yeah. So back to the comment about authenticity and the spectrum. The comment is, if you're not mordanting your fibers with stale urine from a public alehouse, can you really say you're doing authentic natural dyes? Yes. I'm joking, I promise, they say. But on the other hand, that is a perfect example of the spectrum of authenticity. Exactly. Has your urine fermented for maximum ammonia? Were they drinking beer? Exactly, the ale house. Were they drinking ale or beer? Because a lot of the dye manuals, to which you're referring, mention that the ammonia should come from someone who has had, who has strong urine. One of them says. And in fact, one time we did a dyeing workshop where we made the people not participating in the dyeing, which was at that point the menfolk of the group who was learning, we made them drink beer and then pee into a bucket. And then we let that go stale, as some people call it. It's really kind of a fermentation process. And then we use that urine for woad dyeing. But yeah, exactly. And then the question is the ale made using period brewing methods? And have you added hops? Because, you know, hops doesn't get added to ale until like the end of the 15th century is when it becomes beer in most parts of Europe. So, you know, authenticity is a spectrum. And then, oh yeah, we had a party at the house, Magdalena says, and a bucket, best we could do. Yeah, there was a different dying thing, but it was the same person who led your party that led our dying party. Oh, the Contessa cats help in that matter, Tommaso says. Yeah, my cats, I wish I could aim their pee not at my clothes, but say at um, a bucket. That would be great. It's funny how the period manuals never talk about collecting cat urine, probably because, yeah, the proteins, the amino acids, I think it's amino acids, maybe proteins in cat urine that, which I mean, amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. But either way, the content of cat urine might not be something you can easily get out from your processed dye or fabric once you've dyed it, whereas apparently human urine is. If you ever want to watch something funny, watch The Worst Jobs in History with Tony Robinson. I love Tony Robinson. For the Blackadder fans out there, he's Baldar. And he actually goes through history, and it's like a living historian's dream or nightmare, and tries out hands-on what historian experts of each respective era and place have decided are the worst jobs you could possibly have. So yeah, worst jobs in history, can recommend. And they actually work with, it's not sensational like a lot of the shows these days. Excuse me, I'm going to turn on the air conditioning. It's not sensational like a lot of the shows these days are, the reality shows are. It's both hilarious but realistic. Like, he really tries it and gives it a serious shot. And he really talks about his experience from a genuine perspective. It's not sensationalized. It's really educational. And you know, the archaeologists that he works with in this show, they're just so British. It's delightful. One of my favorite ones is in the Stuart era, where he goes and learns to make what we call catgut string, but is actually sheep gut string from the slaughtering of the sheep. I mean, the sheep's already dead, but then he actually has to cut open its carcass and dig out the intestines and then milk the intestines. They actually use the word milk the intestines, by the way. It's a great episode. Can recommend. Yeah. It's with Stuart Peachy, for those who know, the gentleman from the Green Valley, the 17th century Stuart farmstead. Yeah, it's a great episode. Worst jobs in history. They were on YouTube. I don't know if they still are. Let's see. Oh, how did the menfolk react to having their pee used for this? Or are they also deep into history? Oh yeah, no. These menfolk were all into historical recreation. They honestly, there was no surprise or dismay when we told them that they needed to drink and pee in a bucket. Maybe some delight at being actually told to drink instead of asked not to drink so much. Yeah. No, it would have been, you're right. It could have been much more fun if we just gotten some random strangers off the street to pee in a bucket we placed outside of our house. Oh, ideas for Pennsic. I actually, for this coming Pennsic, I have some experimental archaeology, or some, experimental things I'd like to do with some laundry treatments, and also some personal toilet treatments, which for the laundry will actually require ammonia, and I want to create it the proper way. And over a period of 2 weeks, we actually, and lots of heat, from the summer, we actually have time. And there will be plenty of people drinking a variety of strong drink, as one of the dyeing manuals calls it. So I'm probably going to actually be putting a bucket out, and or a bucket I might try to see, I wonder if any of the good potters will be at Pennsic, the ones who sell the reproduction urinals, to figure out how we can suspend it. Anyway, I might be asking people to pee in a bucket at Pennsic. So if you're coming to Pennsic, Belfiore, my household encampment, will actually be sharing space with Enchanted Grounds this year. So stop by and pee in our bucket, please. Yes. Let's see. Oh, I absolutely love that TV show, Worst Jobs in History. Yeah, so many awful jobs. Yeah, I mean, really. There are, of course, to this day, plenty of awful jobs, but it's funny how many of the worst jobs in history technology has happily eliminated. Gong farmer, for instance. No, thank you, very little. For those who don't know what a gong farmer is, houses, depending on where you were in Europe, in many places, houses had what we might call septic tanks, but I think that's too fancy, too sophisticated a word for what was basically a hole in the ground, in the floor of their premises, either sort of at the edge of their home or out in the courtyard. And of course, just like a septic tank, they needed to be emptied out. And there was literally a person whose job it was to go and farm the gong, and they would go and shovel out the pit, the fecal pit. And unfortunately, for many people, what they farmed out of what they dug out of that pit then usually got used as night soil, hence the term night soil. And that means it was used to fertilize crops. So that is why I'm convinced, many medieval recipes instruct you to boil not the living hell, but to boil, at least for a little while, almost everything from meat to vegetables. And the vegetables, I think it's because someone realized, even though they didn't necessarily understand the mechanism behind why boiling prevented people from dying a horrible death, they knew it did. So yeah. Let me see. Oh, Tudor Farm. Yeah, the question is, really love the Green Valley series. Yes, the Green Valley series is another excellent series. Basically, it is 12 months living and working a Stuart era farm that is actually a living history farm in sort of at the edge of the border of Wales and England. Really excellent series. Can recommend. Even if you're not necessarily interested in the Stuart period of history, it's definitely worth taking a look at, really. And the question was, do you watch the TV shows Tudor Monastery Farm, I think you're talking about? In which case, yes, Tudor Monastery Farm. I consider that a hands-on guide to life in late 15th century England. Tudor Monastery Farm, can highly recommend. It's the same team of people who are living in the Green Valley. And also Secrets of the Castle, same people go and work on building the castle in Burgundy, British archaeologists. And Edwardian Farm. I don't think I've seen Edwardian Farm. I've of course heard of it, but I don't think I've actually caught any episodes of it. Back about 20 years ago, before reality shows became so egregious, there was actually, I think it was about 20 years ago, there was a reality show called Edwardian Manor House, I think. There was Victorian Manor House and Edwardian Manor House, and they actually took regular, normal, modern people and dropped them into roles working a Victorian Manor House and then an Edwardian Manor House, complete with the social structures and everything. And it was a bit like the prison experiment with, turning people into guards or prisoners and seeing what happened. Basically the same sort of things ended up happening. People really, these people who were just like regular, everyone was basically from the same socioeconomic class. The people who got to portray the aristocrats really thought they started thinking of themselves as aristocrats. And the people who were playing the servants really started developing the same sort of negative emotions that probably a lot of the downstairs staff was starting to develop by the end of the 19th century in England. So it was very interesting. Yeah. Let me see. Next, I can ask husband to contribute to the bucket at Pennsic. Ah, yes, I'm confident that Eric's contributions will be very valuable. Yes, I might just leave the bucket in camp in Drachenwald and just bring it down when I actually need it. That might be the better plan. Let's see. What are you sewing this morning? What period does it fit in? Okay, so let me just dock this pin and I will attempt to show you. This is, so the question is, what am I sewing this morning, afternoon / evening, and to what period does it fit? Okay, so here, this is called a giornea, and this is the front. It's an overgarment, so you wear it over a gamora. The back is longer. It has a train. It has a pretty significant train than the front. And the front, it goes basically just to the ground. It's open on the sides, completely lined in a silk taffeta. And then the outside is a silk damask of a significantly large pattern. Very nice in 15th century. So this particular gown is Florentine 1480s in this exact style. It is basically a copy, or copy strong because I don't have exactly the same fabric, but it is modeled on the giornée that you see in the Cappella Sassetti in Santa Trinita and the Cappella Tornabuoni in Santa Maria Novella. Right. So a very long train, and also, yes, the Cappella Sassetti has the story of the boy who's resurrected, right? Yeah, and that's the one where in those two sets of frescoes, you can actually see how they carry their train, which is really neat. So you see all these ladies mostly in profile, and they actually have their trains wrapped up around their wrist with their arms tucked at the side. And it creates this really nice, pretty, what I think is an elegant fold in the back that kind of causes the giornea to sweep away from the back a little bit. And then it's almost like a little bit of a bustle, really, but it's pretty, I think it's fetching. And that's how I started carrying my train around. And I actually did a video on this about 4 years ago, about how to dance and walk in gowns with trains. And I talk specifically about how to wrap your train up around your wrist if you are in Italy, how they did it. Yeah, so this is a Florentine garment. They were also, in this particular style, they were also being worn in Siena because Siena was part of Florence by this point. But pro tip, if you are traveling in Italy and you are gallivanting about in period clothing, if you go to Siena in your 1480s Florentine clothing, some people get a little salty with you for not wearing Sienese clothing from Siena's heyday, which was the 14th century. I was actually told to not come back in Florentine clothing by one of the shopkeepers. She was joking a little bit. Okay, let's see. Will there be an extra piece of fabric pinned to the train when you wear it to prevent soiling the silk? Yes. So the hem will actually, not really. So the hem, yes and no. This is going to be the strip that is going to go on the back along the entire hem of the train, the part that really drags, because it doesn't, from wearing these really long trains for the last 24 years, all over the place, especially over in the conditions that you see at a 2-week outdoor event like Pennsic. I can tell you that most of the wear and tear, the dirt, especially the wear and tear, is towards the very edge of the train, because it sort of, it sweeps out like this. It doesn't really, your train doesn't go down straight down the back of your legs, hit the ground, and then like that. No, because when you walk, it pulls it out. So the only part that's really getting wear and tear and dirt is the very edges, mostly the edges of the of the back of the skirt, so the hem area. So that's why this is going in, and this is also how the Gamora of Beata Osana, Blessed Osana, how her Gamora, the hem is finished. Yeah, because we don't have any extant Gamore or Giornee from this period. We only have one, count them, one extant gamora from the 15th century of a lady, that of which I'm aware thus far, and we have 0 extant giornee thus far. Now, as they continue restoration efforts in a variety of crypts and churches throughout Italy, really hoping that they find more people buried in their garments and do actual work on those garments instead of just, putting them back and pretending nothing was found. And I hope we may find more construction details to that effect. But even the gowns in the 16th century have significantly more, and by significantly more, I mean like 10 or 15 extant Italian ladies' gowns, sottane, from the 16th century. And those also, even though they have trains, those are also finished in the same way with a strip about like this on the inside. There is one blue linen sottana, 1550s, and it does have actually a pretty thick facing on the bottom. The facing is more like about this much rather than this much. So we'll see. Maybe next time, maybe I'll make a bigger facing on the inside of the back of the train, but we'll see what happens with this as I abuse it in my customary fashion. Yeah. We will see. That's one of the reasons I love 15th century clothing and earlier is because there is actually some mystery to it. There are actual questions to really be answered because we don't have very many extant pieces. And so it's more of a mystery. It's more of an exploratory process. You have to put together more pieces of the puzzle. I love the puzzle. And that's probably why I'm not so excited about, say, 18th or 19th century clothing. Not because I love those fashions, but I'm not as excited about making them because we pretty much know everything there is to know. We have a literal sewing manuals from that period that tell you how to make things step by step in great detail. We have so many extant garments from that era. We have so many detailed realistic portraits. And then, of course, by the second half of the 19th century, you're getting photographs. So I really enjoy the mystery of 15th century or pre-16th century clothing because there are so many unanswered questions. And so each new discovery is so momentous because there's so few extant garments that even just one new extant garment is game changing. Yeah. That's just me though. Not everyone enjoys the challenge, the puzzle part of the equation. I mean, I definitely enjoy the creative process. I would much rather sit around and sew than play games, like 100%. I'm happy. This is actually weird. I like to sit and sew and I will watch other people play games while I sew rather than play the game myself. Aren't I not right, my love?
Oh, it's true.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, but I enjoy the process of creativity so much more than playing games. Now, choice between dancing and sewing? Oof, depends on how tired I am. That's a hard one. Probably dancing will come first. But then if I need a break, then I will sit down and sew. So does anyone out there, do any of you have any big projects happening? Any big issues with them? Questions that maybe I can answer? I've got my, 2 weeks at Pennsic, which, depending on your definition, could either count as a living history event or a medieval recreationist event or a pirate fairy convention, depending on which part you go to also, I guess. Oh, and the mermaids, although thankfully the ponds at Pennsic are so nasty that no one would want a mermaid in them, especially not with the leeches. Yeah, and crayfish. Yeah, so I've got that 2-week thing, and then I've got an immersive event at the end of September, and then I've been hired to go to a 15th century Venetian ball and teach and lead dance at the end of October. That's exciting. I love it when people actually hire me to Contessa. Which brings me to the point that if you would like me to come and bring the Contessa magic to your event, leading and teaching dance, etc., I am absolutely available for hire. I do travel. I will go anywhere in the world, and I do mean that. Okay, maybe not South Sudan these days, and maybe not the Coup Belt in Africa, unless you can provide me with an armed escort. But I would go with an armed escort because that's the kind of crazy person I am. No, I'm not joking. My husband is sitting there glaring at me, but he knows it's true. Don't you? Oh, big news for those who haven't been following are, well, I guess you kind of have because you all saw, well, many of you saw the trauma from the pee. Here's the culprit. Here's the little pisser. Yes, here's the little pisser. She's so cute. She is adorable. She peed on us the other night in bed. We thought we were past that, but we weren't. I awoke to wet ankles, and she tends to just pee when she plays, so she kind of bounces, and she's like a toddler. You know, they don't want to stop and take time to pee. So why why do that if you don't have to? No, baby. So that's our new little rescue kitten. She has a sad/happy story. So the apartment in which my condottiero lives here in Daegu, at the base of the apartment, we're on the 18th floor, there are a couple of unspayed females. And if I could catch them, I might look into trapping them, maybe if we can find them. They're gone. Maybe someone caught them then. They had litters. And one of them was not meant to be a mother. And unfortunately, we spotted one of the kittens too late. She was covered in flies and had maggots in her mouth and down her esophagus. And we took her immediately to the vet when we found her, but she died a couple of hours later, despite all the efforts of the vet. I mean, we said, money is no object, save this kitten. And they tried, and we got a call a couple of hours later. So then we went back to look at the spot where we found that kitten, and we saw another kitten that looked very similar, but not as far along the process of dying, but was not doing well, was dehydrated, was malnourished, eye completely crusted over with mucus, nose completely crusted over with mucus. So with not much effort, we caught that kitten and brought her to the vet and had her cleaned up and immediately started the process of nursing her back to health. And that is the little kitten you see before you. So we tried to save both of them. Only one of them made it. But the first 24 hours, my condottiero kept talking about how he was going to find someone to take her off of our hands once we got her stabilized. And within 48 hours, that talk had stopped. So now we have 3 cats here and 1 cat in the United States. So 4 cats because I don't know why. That's just the way we are. Oh, the kitten, our new kitten. So we're pretty certain the new kitten was 4 weeks old when we rescued her. So she's probably 8 to 10 weeks old by now, we think. It's a little hard to tell. She's young enough that it's still kind of hard to actually properly sex her. She may or may not be female. She might be male, question mark. And that's coming from the vet, by the way. Yeah, she's that little. But our 2 other kitties, who are also rescue kitties with a less sad story, although somewhat sad, one of them hissed at her pretty repeatedly and violently for the first several days or week of her being here. The other just ran from her. But once she was recovered from the cold that she had, because we were giving her medicine, obviously, and she's, was full of energy, she started chasing him around, and they bonded. And he's a very good big brother to her. And they play fight, and he grooms her, and he puts her in her place when she acts out, and they chase each other around, and it's really cute. He's a really good big brother to her. I'm very happy. And the other kitty has stopped hissing at her and started playing with her. But you can tell he's not as bonded to her as Chimi is. Yeah. So, but she's a cutie. She's got a great purr. She's very cuddly. She likes to sleep on us and then wake up and play with us while we're sleeping. That's why, oh, I don't have the Band-Aid on. There's a cut on my forehead, which you may or may not be able to see, because she decided to play with my forehead while I was sleeping. It was great. Kittens, but she's so adorable. I can't keep her out of the bedroom because she wants to be with us, but then the bed becomes a playground where she's bouncing around like an excited electron. But that is also the kitten that, when she was playing, got into our craft room, as she shouldn't have, and was playing, she peed on this very dress. So, yeah. The vicissitudes of being a cat owner. So yeah, do tell me about your plans for any kind of living history stuff or events involving historical clothing or even travel plans. I strangely don't I've got a couple, I guess I've got 3 trips back to the US planned. I need to make some travel plans to better places well, better seems judgmental, but I do mean that actually. It seems judgmental, but there it is. Better for me anyway. Better places than the US, like Europe. I mean, I visit Korea quite a bit because this is where my condottiero lives. I don't know how much longer he'll be here. We don't know anything, actually. I have no idea where we might be living come September. That's exciting. And I do mean that. That's not hyperbole. I don't know where we're going to be living come September. But I would like to make some plans. What I want to do, I want to do an extant garments tour of Europe, and maybe do it in parts as more realistic. An extant garments tour of Italy, where I map out, and I actually might do this as a Creative Contessa thing, where we actually go on tour. We tour around to all of the places where these extant garments are, and I call the curators or whoever's in charge in advance and see if we can't get permission to actually examine any of these garments up close and personal. But even if we can't, to at least be able to see them firsthand, even looking through annoying glass, would be better than, often than looking at other people's pictures on Pinterest or whatever. So I am seriously thinking about plotting out a extant garments of XYZ country series of tours. Italy and Spain has a lot of amazing extant garments. Germany has some, although a lot of them are in Switzerland. And you can thank Charles the Bold for that. Because of his poor choices, a lot of the Burgundian textile splendors ended up being sacked at the Battle of Granson and the Battle of Nancy in 1476 and 1477, respectively. By Swiss mercenaries that would later become called Landsknecht, and they got taken back to Switzerland, and they ended up actually being donated to the churches in various cantons because, of course, back at that time, you always that was how you sort of paved your way to heaven, was by making opulent donations to your local church. And what could be more opulent than $5,000 a meter cloth of gold, so that the priest could have nice cloth of gold raiments. So there's a lot of extant 15th century textiles in Swiss churches for that reason. And I've not spent much time in Switzerland. It's a beautiful country, so that could be a nice little tour as well. Extant medieval garments of Switzerland. We could, maybe take river boats and that kind of trains and that sort of thing. That would be really fun. So I am seriously considering that as well, putting together a series of medieval extant garment tours, and probably do it as a package thing. I'd arrange the lodging and handle the transport, and food would be on the people who go with. We could eat together, but it's at your own cost sort of thing. And of course, make all the arrangements to actually view these garments and make sure that sites are open and that sort of thing. So that's something I'm seriously considering. Let's see. October Crown tournament is in the Netherlands. Oh, that's good to know. That's good to know. Is it at the Magdalena? Is it at the Powder House in Ghent, or where is October Crown? Christina says prepping for Pennsic, making a new 16th century style gown and a new Roman one. Oh yeah, new 16th century. Christina, Elizabeth, what era, or not era, obviously 16th century. What part of Europe in the 16th century are you making for Pennsic? And a Roman one. I think that speaks for itself. I'm probably one of the few people who comfortably wears whatever at Pennsic. Pennsic is not hot to me. It gets a little warm, but I've lived in tropical parts of the world too long to be bothered by Pennsic weather. It's not overly hot to me, generally. It has to get super duper hot for me to actually think it's too hot. And then, Elizabeth's also maybe considering making a pair of what we affectionately call Landsknecht hot pants. Sort of counterculture, the short, the booty pants that in which you sometimes see, especially 16th century Landsknecht, like early first half of the 16th century Landsknecht, first quarter, wearing. A lot of Drachenwald ladies like to make a pair for themselves to be completely counterculture. And the same place you were elevated. Oh, that place. Okay. Yep. I know that place. Oh, you're making a Saxon style gown, right? Yeah. Yeah, I would someday maybe like to make myself a Saxon style, a nice queenly Saxon style gown. Saxon meaning 16th century Saxony, Duchy of Saxony, not like 10th century or 11th century English, not that kind of Saxon. The original Saxons, shall we say. not the immigrant Saxons. Oh, yeah. This is what happens when I talk too much. I don't pay attention enough to my thread and it knots on itself. Should have re-waxed it. So let that be a lesson. You might wax your thread at the beginning of your sewing process, but you might have to re-wax it depending on how many stitches you're doing. Also, never make your thread too long. Know your thread. And I actually know this thread. I should know better than this, honestly. This thread I should always do in short quantities because it does knot on itself. That's on me. I'm paying more attention to chatting with you all than to my own sewing. That's my fault. And if I were to make an extant garment tour of Spain, we'd have to go to Burgos. There's a huge collection of 12th century, extant 12th century garments in a church in Burgos, and that's pretty remarkable. Like for those of you who do 12th century, like the place you really need to go is Spain. Now, granted, yes, Spain is always the outlier. It's an exception because, of course, it was such an amazing cultural mix of Christian and Arab and Jewish and Northern African. And so, you've got a different level of kind of technology and a different sense of fashion to a certain extent. But that being said, I think it would be better to base your 12th century French gown on an extant 12th century Spanish gown than on nothing, than just some statuary. So yeah, there's actually an extant bliot, a man's bliot, no less, with beautiful sleeves in Burgos. Actually, would be really neat to go and examine those garments if we can. There's also some 15th century, extant 15th century garments in Spain. I have to go figure out where that is and actually go there, which I was unaware of until I bought this book, this German book on reconstructing medieval garments. And it's basically a catalog of a massive number of extant medieval garments from like the 5th century up to the 15th century. And some of them many of them I was familiar with. Many of them were new to me though. And there was one of the new to me ones was an extant child's, what in Italian we would call a cotta or a gamora, high-waisted in the way they were in Spain in the second half of the 15th century. And that is just a valuable trove, and it's very well preserved. I don't remember if the seam survived. It actually details the seams and stitches and what survived and what didn't, and I don't remember on that one if the seam survived or if they were restored. But if the seams survived, the stitching specifically survived, then that would be a very valuable source of 15th century tailoring information that I'd really like to get my hands on. Because again, yes, it's Spain. Yes, it may or may not be different from the rest of Europe, but Spain and Italy had big time connections in the 15th century. Mercantile, religious, social, dynastic. So, I mean, the Kingdom of Naples was ruled by the royal family of Aragon. So, yeah, to just say, well, there's no connection between those two places in terms of material culture is utter nonsense. So, yeah, it would be very valuable to be able to go and look at that little girl's dress if at least through the glass and maybe up close and personal, depending. Yeah, there's a lot of people who have this odd view of medieval Europe as being one, isolated from the rest of the hemisphere, and two, as each region being so insular and isolated that there is no relation between them. If you are portraying a 15th century Florentine person, then you should not have clothes from, and I'll be very specific, from 15th century Burgundy. Well, there's all kinds of things wrong with that. um, because I've been preparing these vlogs for my new pink wool Gamora. I've of course been reviewing expense accounts and inventories and all sorts of primary source documentary evidence from this era. And I can tell you that in the expense accounts and inventories and trousseau inventories, they actually often indicate a national is the wrong word, a regional identity for clothing that is not Florentine. So, Lorenzo de Medici had several garments that are described as being in the French style, in the Burgundian style, actually, no, usually just in the French style, because for them, Burgundian and French were basically the same. Like, they didn't really distinguish culturally between those two places. Um, in the Castilian style, I've seen multiple garments being described as such and such garment in the Castilian style. So, or in the Hungarian style, in the German style. So people had garments made in other styles because fashion is fashion and people want to have different things. They want to we're peacocks, right? Humans, we've always been peacocks. How we peacock has kind of changed over time, but we always find ways to peacock, even around social strictures, even around sumptuary laws. We find a way. And, when you are at the crossroads of Europe and you see all these peoples from all parts of the world, coming through your lands and coming to your festivals, and the ambassadors and their ladies and their daughters, and you see them and you think, wow, I want to dress like that. Then you have someone make you that thing. And maybe it's not exactly the exact same way that it might have been made if it had been made in Ghent instead of by a tailor in Florence, but it's definitely still going to be in the correct silhouette. So, yeah, I say if you are portraying, especially someone from the upper classes, and you have your persona has the affluence to afford it, you can absolutely, with historic fidelity, get away with having garments cut in styles from different parts of Europe in that same period. And it is not only authentic, it seems to be common in the upper classes. Rant off. So I will be interested, for those who are familiar with what Pennsic is, and if you're not, you might be interested in checking it out if you are in the right continent. It's, Pennsic is a 2-week medieval recreationist event, and it has different levels of authenticity depending on where you are. And, you can find a way to have a pretty authentic medieval experience for 2 weeks, or you can find a way to just descend into drunken Caribbean style piratery for 2 weeks and just, barely remember what happened. It's your choice. But, I'm pretty excited to see how it will be this year, or interested. Excited might be strong. I'm expecting there will be many fewer people than last year. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the event. And so it was an extremely, almost overly attended event, one might say. And the level of revelry was pretty excessive. And I'm hoping that maybe this year there'll be less raucous. At least the revelry will return to previous levels of raucousness, because last year was pretty intense. So does your historical expertise extend to the spinning of fibers for these sumptuous fabrics? As I say in one of the vlogs that's about to come out, I have done spinning. I have tried my hand at drop spinning. I have a basic understanding of the process, and I have not kept up with it in any kind of way, so I am completely unpracticed. And so whenever I try again my hand at drop spinning, I just kind of get a wild hair up my butt. It looks like a 2-year-old with no hands tried. Actually, probably a handless 2-year-old might make better looking thread than I do. Yeah, no, I cannot claim any skill as a spinster. And that's okay, because, it's funny. We as historical recreationists in almost any period often often end up trying to create way more components of the garment than we would have in the 15th century, for example. I also mentioned this in one of my vlogs that's about to come out, that labor was so specialized in the pre-industrial era, so specialized that you had a different person. The tailor was just there to take measurements and draft the garment and cut it out. And then there were different people who actually handled the seaming of that garment. That's a seamster, or yeah, a seamer or a seamstress, right? The feminine version of that. They're literally the ones who put the seams in the garment. And then you had, in the textile production industry, the people who were the spinners were not the same people as the weavers. And by the way, there were spinners in wool anyway. You had one set of spinners who was responsible for spinning the warp threads, and the other was responsible for spinning the weft threads. And they usually weren't the same people. They actually specialized in just one kind of spinning. So you had the drop spinners actually did the weft. I can't remember. It's offhand. The drop spinners handled either the weft or the warp, and the walking wheel spinners handled making the other part in the wool industry in the 15th century. So, here we are, and some people who have the ability to do this, they've bought a loom and they have a walking wheel and they have a drop spindle and they actually bought sheep and they're actually, like harvesting the wool from the sheep and doing the combing and the carding and the washing and the spinning and then the weaving and then the processing of the wool and doing that all themselves. But the reality is that wool production until the industrial era was like a 20-person process from start to finish. So yeah. No, I don't. I let other people do that, even though occasionally I think, oh, that'd be interesting to try. This brings me back to full circle, the conversation about immortality. If I had hypothetically unlimited time, as in I wasn't going to die of old age, maybe I could just die of an accident, but not old age, I would probably also then definitely explore those other forms of production to the point where I would get masterful at them. But the reality is that unless you're going to devote decades of your life to attaining mastery of them, you're probably not going to be able to reach the level that you'll be able to produce something like this using medieval techniques. Yeah. Let's see. Been some comments since there. That's fair. Yeah, that was probably about my handless 2-year-old would spin better than I would. Yeah. This person says, I can spin flax and wool, but silk and cotton are so out of my league that would also look like toddler play. Yeah. Yeah. Cotton is a very specialty fiber. It's the history of cotton is really a fascinating one, especially in Europe and its uses in Europe. There's a fantastic book called The Cotton Industry in the Middle Ages, and I think it covers the years like 1000 to 1600. Great book, can recommend. Was very eye-opening to learn about, because there's many urban legends that you hear when you join the medieval living history world, and amongst them are women didn't wear underwear. Bullshit. I have really really solid evidence that in certain parts of Europe they absolutely definitely did, and also that cotton is not a fiber that existed in medieval Europe, and it certainly was never turned into fabric, and blah 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 diddy blah. But then when you actually start exploring actual primary sources, you start learning that many of these urban legends are nonsense. Now, while that being said, cotton was, I've, vanishingly little to no evidence that I've personally found that comes to mind instantly of pure cotton. I have no primary source evidence that I've personally discovered of pure cotton being used for overgarments. And I can't think of any evidence, primary source evidence that I've personally seen for pure cotton being used for undergarments. I found some secondary source references. Well, this garment could be made out of linen or cotton. It's like, okay, but show me the evidence of that, right? That being said, cotton was definitely mixed with linen, and that's what fustian is. And cotton, of course, was used heavily for the padding of garments. Very heavily for the padding of garments, especially arming garments or garments that sort of crossed over from being arming garments to civilian garments, which was very true in Italy when there's a whole bunch of paranoid men-at-arms wandering around wanting their clothing to provide extra protection, even if it doesn't look like it's protective. Oh, good. God give you good morrow. Wow, one of my stateside apprentices is up and joining. She's already on at, well, I guess it's not hideously early. It's 8 a.m. there. But for those who would like to join again, I'm doing or if you're in a different time zone, I am doing another one of these in about 12 hours, actually. I'm currently in the land of the morning calm, the land of Joseon, as some of you may know as Korea. So the time difference kind of means I like to try to offer things in 2 different time slots to catch the European crowd, the Asian crowd, and this is not, I'm not talking about ethnicity or citizenship. I'm talking about time zones, just so we're clear. So the Asian crowd, the European crowd, and the Americas crowd. Right. So I try to do that when I can, when I have that luxury of time. And actually right now this is helping me get sewing done. So thank you all for joining me. Yeah, so to the topic of cotton and padding, I actually found a very interesting reference for 15th century Italian clothing. I was again reviewing inventories and expense accounts and trousseaus and that sort of thing. And I actually found a reference for the construction of a gamora or a cota. Might have been the cota, the same one that has 120 lacing rings on the front. That is very clear evidence that the bodice was padded, because it actually talks about it lists the materials for the cota, and it actually talks about padding, the cotton padding for it. And I've been wondering for a while, because you look at these gamora and these cotte, these gamore and these cotte, and they, of course it's a portrait, right? It's a portrait, so obviously it's going to be slightly idealized. Unless the artist is really fastidious, which most of them aren't, at least that wasn't the purpose of portraiture in the 15th century, to show every little detail, every little flaw, every little wrinkle. Often they don't. Intentionally, they don't. That level of realism was even in Italy, they knew that the Flemish artists were renowned for that level of detail and realism. But the Italian artists were all about the ideal. They were focusing on the ideal male, female beauty, and sort of a calm perfection, which is why their hair is always exactly correct and every fold of clothing is exactly the way it should be. And if you look really closely at the patterns on the fabrics, they don't actually follow logically the way it should if there are pleats or whatnot, because that wasn't the purpose. Anyway, despite that, you've got these really round, smooth busts over these ladies. And, the men's garments, the farsetti with their pigeon-breasted shape, that is absolutely created by padding. Tons of evidence of that. But this is the first time that I found solid evidence of the bodice of the ladies' foundational garment, the cota or gamora, having padding. And that makes so much sense, because if you add that layer of cotton batting in, then that's going to help it stay smooth. It's going to fill it out. It's going to create that round look. And then you can actually pat it to make your bust more busty in the case of certain petitely busted people, like, say, I. So that was an exciting discovery, I think, 2 days ago. And I will be implementing that definitely in my 1450s Kota project, ensemble project, for certain. I'm definitely going to be applying that bit of knowledge. Yeah, so that was exciting. I know the things that excite me are not normal. It's really not normal at all. Fireworks, meh. Trousseau inventory from 1450 talking about the cotton padding for the bodice. Woo! I should see a psychiatrist probably. So how are things in the US, Lucrezia? If you watch the recording from the first part of this, there's some maybe interesting conversation, hopefully. For those who are watching my hands, I'm actually doing a stab stitch. And this was an experiment. This setup, this is the first time I've done a collab on YouTube where I've able to do 2 screens. And I can see already that I think I'll probably be putting the secondary camera, my collaborator, who's me, closer so that you can actually see my hands and what I'm doing better. Because the purpose of that was so that you could actually, if you wanted, watch my stitching. I know for some people that's very relaxing. And just stab stitching away here, stab, 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 stab. And in future sips and stitches, if there are any, particular topics you'd like me to address, just let me know. I'm happy to come prepared and hold forth on a variety of topics. Just ask any of my apprentices. If you're attending Pennsic this year, I'm teaching about 15 classes, 15 dance classes, and I'm hosting a red and gold ball on the middle Friday, a 15th century focus. Red and gold is the theme color. And then, of course, there'll be food and drink and wonderful music by our beloved Master Albrecht, who is one of the best musicians, early musicians with whom I've ever worked, and I've worked with a lot. And then I will be hosting on the Tuesday of the second week of Pennsic my Enchanted Picnic, which is sort of my Decameron style picnic where we immerse ourselves in 15th century courtly culture and people sing and tell stories and recite poetry. And my musician is there for us to dance, and we have picnic foods, and we just have a lovely couple of hours in the afternoon for a relaxed Decameron style. If you've read Il Decamerone, Boccaccio's seminal collection of body short stories, the original one, not the nonsense thing that's about to come out on Netflix. I can't even. I saw the promo for that and it made me gag. The bangs on the one woman and the weird lampshade on the head of the other. Yeah, you can definitely count on me doing a costume critique on that particular work. And I'm going to have some very sharply Ostensian things to say about it. Let's see. My apprentice says she's not doing terrible. She's awake and figuring out why parts of the Burgundian collar isn't laying correctly. Yes. So my apprentice, Lucrezia, she is making a Burgundian gown in the style that you can see on me in the Getting Dressed Like a Medieval Princess series that I've rolled out a whole bunch of shorts, but it's actually predicated on long format videos that are out. And I put together, the whole one is now out. I think it's 26 minutes long or something like that. Anyway, she's making a gown like the overgown in that one, the pink gona, as it would have been called in 15th century English, or robe à tassel, as a lot of modern French reenactors call it, although I have not been able to find that term in any medieval French source. There just seem to be called robe gowns in the inventories. Anyway, she's making one like mine, and all the ones I've made to this point have in a turn-back collar, which means you have to do a really complex bit of tailoring around the shoulders and the neck to get it to actually just be one collar that's sewn and then lays flat. Lucrezia, have I sent you the pictures of the complex patterning for mine? If not, let me know and I'll send you the snapshot of that so you can see. It took me a while to figure it out, and I've basically mastered it, but I think on my next Burgundian style gown, I will be doing an attachable collar, which is so much easier than the turnback collar. The turnback collar is a crazy, the tailoring is must be so precise, or it will not stay on your shoulders. It will slide off annoyingly. You can see my medieval sewing mistakes video if you want to hear me complain about the shoulders sliding off and how I had to completely reconstruct the shoulders and neckline of the very pink gown that you see in that video series on getting dressed like a medieval princess. Yes. So yes, Lucrezia, just drop me a message on Messenger and I will find the pictures and send them to you. It's actually a lot like once I draped it and came up with it and then laid it out and looked at it, I realized it's very similar to the turn back collar on business suits. Yeah, modern business suits. Men's modern fashion, so sad. So very, very sad. I should re-wax this. Yeah, and then Lucrezia says she's basing it off of suit collar roughly in shape. Yeah, but I came to that discovery accidentally because I'd never really looked at a suit collar before then, and I just came up with it by thinking about it and drafting it and then draping the draft. And then I happened to see a couple of years later the pattern for a suit collar, and I went, oh, yeah. So that is the right way to go. It also kind of depends on how deep you want the collar, how high in the back, that sort of thing. But I ended up having to completely rebuild mine after I realized some of the mistakes I made. And unfortunately, I made 2 gowns at once. Like I cut them at once, wanting to get them done for a specific series of events. And, I got one of them actually sewn up and started wearing it and realized, oh my God, this is nightmarish. The other one was already made. So I did the reconstruction work and I had to like reconstruct the sleeve cap on the sleeves, and I had to completely take the collar apart and add pieces, and it really looks like a Rorschach test a little bit now. And I took apart the other gown, but I never got around to actually doing that reconstruction work on it because that reconstruction work was so frustratingly fiddly and extensive. Yeah. I will though, because it's literally one more Burgundian gown I could be wearing, and it's a yellow silk satin lined in black silk with a black silk guard, and it's covered in like 100 hand appliqued black silk heraldic dragons because it was the gown I wore as the queen of a kingdom in the SCA called Drachenwald, and it really does deserve to get worn again, damn it, and it hasn't been worn in 14 and a half years, so it deserves to see the light of day again, damn it. And also I need more Burgundian gowns. So maybe I'll make that one of my Pennsic projects. See if we can get that fixed up at Pennsic. Because, we always have so much time at Pennsic. We don't end up with lots of time at all. And let's see, Lucrezia says, this is one of my experimental ones. And then hopefully I can get my silk one without too much figuring it out and more sewing. Yeah. That's always the hope, isn't it? It's one of the things that has actually prevented me from making a new Burgundian style gown in 14 years because no, that's not true. In 13 years because I am 11 years because I am it's been 11 years because I reworked the pattern, and even that I wasn't quite happy with the reworking out of it, even though I did take other things into consideration. That's the the Burgundian red silk gown in which many of you have seen me in dance videos or in pictures. That is the reworked one with the updated pattern, but even it wasn't quite right. And, I have these stunning silks, reproduction quality 15th century silk damasks, real silk. And I have them and I've been storing. I've got silk velvet, like, okay, the pile is silk. The ground fabric is not, but the pile is silk. And I've got these and I've just been so hesitant to to use them until I actually really feel like I'm solid in the pattern, and it's not there yet, and I have to repattern it because the last time I adjusted the pattern, and this I cover in my medieval sewing mistakes video, I made the cardinal error of not doing it on top of a kirtle. And so it doesn't fit properly over my kirtle sleeves, as my ladies in waiting know. It has to be pinned. The kirtle sleeves have to be pinned down into it so that they don't show. The neckline of the kirtle doesn't show in the opening of the gown. So I still have more adjustments to do. And I actually started to do that process to rework the pattern about 6 years ago. And then a series of military moves, and just it fell by the wayside. I'll just say that it completely fell by the wayside. So that's another of the things to do. And that patterning and pattern drafting, those are activities that require major energy because you need to have focus and you need to have your brain firing on all 8 cylinders. And if your brain is not a V8 brain, then you need to get an upgrade if you're going to do pattern drafting and draping, because you really need to have all of your mental faculties fully sharp, or you will make a mistake that will then get perpetuated in possibly expensive materials. So it's definitely not something I can do when I'm stressed or in a rush. Definitely never try patterning when you're in a rush, because I've done that and I have paid the price literally for that error in judgment. Let's see. Oh, wait, Lucrezia, that "oh yes, please," to what was that in response? And one of my other apprentices, Elizabeth, says, modifying patterns is a pain. Also, I have lots of fabric that I don't want to use yet. Yep, see, I feel you 100%. Lucrezia says, if we need to do a fitting, let me know. I can help with fitting and patterning, finessing. Yep, and that's why I was thinking, I have all these talented apprentices and beloved friends who will be at Pennsic. And, I don't have to do it all myself. I really don't. I mean, I guess there is a certain pride in saying, yes, I did this without any help from anyone. But on the other hand, why add extra stress to my life when I literally have a real professional, not a dilettante professional like me, who can actually help me. So Lucrezia, you are on at Pennsic. We will be doing some Burgundian pattern fixing, and maybe I will put the word out, and anyone who's at Pennsic who wants to come and witness the process can join us in camp, and it can become a whole Creative Contessa live event. Like, exciting. A Creative Contessa event where the people are in the same space together. Oh my God. I'm so excited at that concept. I mean, I love being with you all here this evening, afternoon, and morning, depending on your hemisphere. But sometimes it is nice to actually be in the same room with people. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I can definitely see where I need to put this other camera differently. I didn't want it to interfere too much. Let's see if I can just, I didn't want it to be too in screen, as it were. But on the other hand, I feel like, being able to see my hands is maybe just as important as not having the slight visual disturbance of a camera off to the left on the screen. Let me see. Oh, the heraldry gown. Oh, yeah. Okay. So Lucrezia was exclaiming in excitement about the dragon heraldry dress. Yes. I will. Okay. Has to go on the packing list. Handsome. I'm reaching out to my condottiero / secretary / general helper. I need to add the yellow dragon dress to my packing list. Just remind me.
Yellow dragon dress to the back.
Write it down somewhere so we remember. Yeah. It probably wouldn't show up in this light. It's so white.
What am I writing?
The yellow dragon heraldry dress to Pennsic for Pennsic packing list, and with sleeves. The sleeves are the thing, and scraps. Yeah. Yeah, Lucrezia says, yay, I'm happy to assist. I'm lucky as I have a friend who are close and can help with fitting me here. Yeah, it's rare that I have that as a operating condition. And Elizabeth says, love the dragon gown. And the dragon gown was beautiful So the dragon dress, which I'm hoping maybe many of you will get to see, maybe this Pennsic, wouldn't that be fantastic? The dragon dress is beautiful for several reasons, not just because it's physically beautiful. It was a community project of love in which dozens of people literally helped me sew the dress. I did all the like it was such a medieval process. It was accidentally authentic. I handled the patterning and the tailoring in the sense of I cut it out. And then I brought the pieces with me to events, and we would, men and women, we would sit around, people of all persuasions, we would sit together and we would sew on it. And it would just sit in a corner. There would basically be the dragon dress corner. And whenever someone wanted to join and help with whatever, however they could, they would take a seat and they would just, work on the seams, or once the seams were together, applique the dragons on, or actually, no, we appliqued the dragons first. Sorry. First, we appliqued the dragons on each panel, and then we did the seams. Yes, handsome. Did you already include it?
Yeah.
Yellow dragon dress plus sleeves, right? Pennsic notes. Plus sleeves. And so there was literally this corner where, and I would be there and people would join me, and then I would get up and go do something else because I was crown princess at the time, so I had other duties. And maybe a couple of friends would sit down and work on appliquing dragons, and when that was done, they would work on the seams. And it was just a really beautiful thing. And I told people of all skill levels. I did not, you know, and you could tell there was definitely a learning curve or a difference in skill on some of the dragons and the whip stitches there. But you know what? I didn't care because that wasn't the point. The point was that it was a group project that we all created together, and that I, as the queen, representing them as the people, that we were one and the same person, that we had created this thing together, and that I was, in wearing it, I was wearing their affection and showing my affection for them. Right. So the dragon dress is a beautiful dress for many reasons. And actually, now that I say that aloud, I'm really ashamed of myself that I haven't fixed it so that I can wear it again before now. That's on me. Oh, the little baby's over there sleeping, Nabi. We named our rescue kitten Nabi, which means butterfly in Korean. It's a common kitty name. And the way she runs around on the bed when we're sleeping on it, it feels kind of like a drunk butterfly with claws. Yeah. If butterflies had claws and were drunk, then that would be that. Imagine that, and that's our kitten when we're trying to sleep. Yeah. So let's see, what other discoveries or projects? I'm also working on the script for a video on medieval rings because one of my channel sponsors, in addition to my very generous patrons and my YouTube channel members, I also am sponsored by Armor and Castings, very talented medieval reproduction jewelers based in the Ukraine. If you've seen my collar, or my portinari collar, or you've seen my beautiful belt, or the pendants on the lapels of my the hood of my Not a Hennin, then those are all Armor and Casting products. And they sent me a batch of rings and badges, and so I'm going to be doing a video on medieval rings and a video on medieval badges. And I'm really learning some very interesting things about medieval rings that I had never considered. Magic, at least the practice of a what they perceived as magic, big part of medieval life. Uh, People were getting accused of sorcery all the time, but it wasn't. It's really funny. And this is connected to rings. I'll explain in a moment. But people imagine that there were all these witch burnings in the Middle Ages, but actually, the records that I've been finding, people weren't burned for being sorcerers or witches, except for the Templars, who were falsely accused of being sorcerers and then burnt alive. But it was not the sorcery that usually got them killed. It was the crime in which they supposedly used sorcery that got them killed. So, usually there were lots of people who were practicing sorcery to help women conceive, or to help women not conceive, unconceive, or to, there was the mother-in-law of the Queen of France, Mao d'Artois, She apparently was a practicing sorceress, and she was performing love spells to ensure that the king stayed in love with her daughter, the queen. And so, yeah, it's she didn't actually, she wasn't executed for that at all. People who got executed for sorcery tended to get executed for sorcery because they were plotting against the king, plotting against the pope. Yeah, it was the crime itself, in which, sorcery was just sort of the tool. It was the weapon. It was not the crime. The crime was whatever the crime actually was. So that's been an interesting revelation. Also, texts on how to actually make magic rings to accomplish specific tasks. I've discovered a whole 15th century treatise on that, and that's been very interesting. Like, there's a spell or a formula, maybe more specific formula. 'Cause spell, it doesn't read like a spell. It's literally a series of steps you need to take in order to imbue a ring with magic, so that you can make soldiers appear and disappear at will. Which, that would be a really handy thing to have if it actually worked, but also it'd really suck if your entire war strategy revolved around this magic ring. That is definitely not going to work. Let's see. Your talk of magic reminds me that I've not taken my daily physic to protect against melancholy. Please, gentlefolk, if you also have forgotten, make haste to take your own remedies. Ah, yes, that is a good point. Yes, for those of you who might have any sort of remedy for whatever condition may ail you and your humor's needs must be balanced, please see to that. I know I myself have not taken my usual physics for the day and should probably do that right after we finish up with our little sip and stitch here. But of course, rings of magic rings appear heavily in the Arthurian romances and in other epics and stories of great moment. They're very common, and there's you think about it. You look at a lot of these rings that we have that have survived from the Middle Ages, and any of them might have actually been in its time. Someone may have thought that they were purchasing a magic ring. These things that we excavate from sometimes cesspits, sometimes hoards, or that end up in church treasuries. That ring may have originally been, gone through some sort of ritual or process so that it would be a love ring or a protective ring or whatever. But, the idea of magic rings that Tolkien picks up very heavily in his series, that he picked that up straight out of medieval epics, basically. Of course, my video essay will also be discussing wedding rings and betrothal rings and that sort of thing. And also, of course, I've been reading some lapidaries, which are medieval treatises on the properties of various stones. And that's very interesting because, the powers that they attribute to some of these stones are really crazy. And, it seems like the so-called New Age people who are big into crystal power, yeah, they ain't got nothing on their medieval forebears. So yeah, some very interesting things about rings and some very interesting things about badges as well, especially pilgrims' badges. Apparently the Duke of Burgundy, when he went on pilgrimage, he would buy badges, not just for himself, but for his entire household to the tune of like 112 badges. And of course, as you may imagine, he would buy different quality ones in different calibers and cost based on the rank of each member of his household. So the highest ranking members, of course, got gold ones. Then the next level got silver. Then it was gold gilt. Then it was silver gilt. Then it was just pewter. And what's really interesting is the practice was apparently on the continent. You didn't necessarily wear your badge. You actually you got home and then you sewed it into your book of hours. So it would be a whole page with cast pilgrims badges sewn into it. And we actually have several books of hours where they either still have their badges sewn into them, or you can see the pages where there used to be badges sewn into them. They have the stitch holes still in sort of the corrosion imprint of the badge itself. So yeah, been discovering some interesting things in my content creation process. You know, every new discovery just makes the medieval world that much more real and that much richer for me. And a lot of people ask me why the medieval world. I couldn't tell you why specifically. The medieval world has fascinated me from my earliest years as a child. My earliest memories are of being fascinated by images of, and I mean original medieval art, not like pre-Raphaelite art, you know, illumination depictions and medieval portraits of ladies and knights, and then reading the Arthurian romances, and just, you know, the the details of daily life fascinate me, how people used to do things, and there's so much we can learn from the medieval, many, not just medieval, but most pre-industrial ways of living. We can learn so much about sustainability and how to live more sustainably. Um, right? Obviously, we can do it better without the lead and the arsenic and the mercury, but we can do it. So that's fascinating. But, also the courtly culture specifically, which obviously was highly ritualized and was practiced in very specific scenarios. And I get that. But even still, there's just something beautiful about courtly culture throughout various parts of Europe, across the centuries, in sort of pre-Reformation Europe. The Reformation messes it all up. Yeah, there's a reason I don't care for the 16th century. It's an ugly century, and it's just ugh. You've got the wars of religion. You've got all of these splinter denominations and cults of Christianity that are really super repressive to women. I mean, yeah, you thought the church, capital C, which would become called the Catholic Church, was repressive? Oh no. No, no, no. Calvinism? Bah. There was one sect, I think in the city of Ulm, they actually literally told women to stay at home and, just do women's work and never to leave and go out of doors. It was super repressive. And that lasted for not very long before it collapsed under the weight of its own repression. But yeah, 16th century is a mess. It's just an ugly time. So the 15th century for me is kind of like the best of all worlds. We have, the flourishing of philosophy and discourse and music and art and dance and even science. And there's so much discovery happening in various places across the world. You know, the Chinese, the Ming Dynasty's voyage of exploration. In Korea and Joseon, you have basically a renaissance of not just art and music, but also a social renaissance under Sejong the Great, and a scientific revolution and an engineering revolution. Obviously in Europe, you have all sorts of advancements and developments. It's like the last hurrah before things get ugly in a lot of places. Then the emperor dies in China, and then his successor shuts the doors so hard that China basically starts regressing almost immediately. In the reaction in Joseon is about the same. Over the centuries, it gets worse and worse for women. Joseon becomes a poor, backwards country. Europe, wars of religion, the consolidation of power and wealth, the enclosure acts that take away the communal grazing lands, and then the Industrial Revolution, which super concentrates the wealth at the top. So 15th century all the way. Yeah. But yeah, if you ask me why not other centuries, because we don't know anything about dance in the other centuries. And yeah, that's terrible, but it's dead honest. I was fascinated by 12th century culture because, the 12th century is also a kind of glowing of culture, of especially courtly culture and the cult of courtly love, in France, in the Dordogne, in Aquitaine. And the clothing is so elegant and beautiful in France and Spain and Italy and even England, but especially in France. And so I started there, exploring Bliot and all the beauties thereof. And then I realized that we know nothing about dance from that period, and that was very disappointing. So the 15th century is the first solid evidence of how dance in Europe looked and moved. And so that's one of the reasons I moved up to the 15th century. But then I also realized that the iconic, medieval princess look with the steepled headdress that many people wrongly call a hennin. That's solidly 15th century. So I was okay with that. Because that is the look that I grew up admiring in all of the medieval art books that populated the shelves of my childhood home. Okay. Well, are there any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we've been going for nearly 2 hours. I haven't had dinner yet, and it's almost 10 p.m. Joseon time. So I'll open the floor for last questions, comments, sharings, and then I will, by the point you all have maybe asked or commented, I will have finished this this hem. It's not really a seam, is it? Line of stitching. I will have finished this line of stitching. I will be releasing, it will be going public in about 12 hours. I will be releasing the next episode in the project vlog for my pink wool gamora. It's full of interesting tidbits in addition to, some useful tips about 15th century tailoring and sewing and the creation process of such a garment. It's about 15 minutes long, I think, so not very long. Yeah, I definitely made this way too long. Let's see. Just hope to see you soon, whenever that may mean. Yeah, I can't believe it's been too. This is the longest I've stayed away from Europe since COVID. This last year I kept meaning to get back, and it just didn't. It never happened. So I'm got to plan. I'm going to plan an autumn trip. I've got to plan an autumn trip to Europe. This is just untenable. So yeah. It's been too long. I can't believe it's been a year since Drachenwald 30 year, almost, or over a year, actually. It feels like yesterday. This year has just flown by, I'll be honest. If comment question, if I could recommend a good book to start to explore medieval garment history, that would be great. Thank you for the cozy sewing session. Yeah. If to start exploring, that would probably be Margaret C. Scott's Medieval Fashion. It's a biggish blue book, like about yay big. And it's good because it covers, pretty certain it's Margaret C. Scott. I will put in the comments once this publishes, I'll put in the comments, I'll go double check. I'll put in the comments, the actual title to be certain. But it's a good overview because she uses documentary evidence and visual evidence, and she explores, Europe, England, France, Italy, Spain, not just England or not just Italy or not just France. And she starts in the 12th century and goes up to like the late 15th, very early 16th century, kind of the end of the medieval period, as it were. I can definitely recommend that because it is an overview and it does also provide some really great documentary stuff. And then you can also check out her bibliography. I would say that's a pretty good place to start if you're interested in the garment history. If you're interested in reconstruction, like specifically extant garments and the construction of those garments rather than the kind of social history around it, then there's a couple of different books for that. But I would say probably a good place to start is Margaret C. Scott's book, Medieval Fashion, Study of Medieval Fashion. I'll put it in the comments because it's a pretty important topic, how to get into it. And there's so many better resources now to get started in this crazy journey than there were when I started almost 30 years. No, I did start 30 years ago. When I started 30 years ago, first off, we didn't have internet access. And even then, the internet was a wasteland of chat and porn. You all have heard that before in my videos, but it's still true. And even, many of the sources we now have hadn't even been discovered or published yet. So it's just such a better time to get into this whole crazy medieval garment history exploration than it was 30 years ago. I can only imagine if I had at my fingertips then the information that is available now, I can't even imagine where I might be along my journey by now. So much further. So much further. Yeah. Yeah, so the next sip and stitch is in 11 hours. If you're awake, still awake, awake again, whatever it is, and care to join back in, please do. I will be happy to see you there. Yeah, I will go double check on that. I will say also, there's a couple of videos on the channel, books, my book specifically book recommendation videos. There's 2 or 3 of them, like the Contessa book corner or something like that. If you do a content search and just put in books, it should bring up the videos, because I actually did do a couple of videos with sort of the, so you want to get into this, here's books I recommend. I did them for dance and I also did it for fashion. So you might want to check those out as well, because I think I talk about general garment history. For if you're looking to get into, where's the book? If you're looking to get into 15th century Italian fashion, the seminal book on that is actually by Jacqueline Harold. And it's a book that is so expensive if you buy it, but you can definitely get it through interlibrary loan. And it's specifically on Italian Renaissance clothing in the Italian Renaissance or something like that is the title. I've literally just had it. Oh, I think I took it to the bathroom to read. Anyway, yeah, there's different books for more specific periods, but for general medieval, Margaret C. Scott's books are pretty good as a generalist approach. Yeah. Okay, well, if you have any other questions, of course, this is going to publish. You can put them in the comments below that video. If you've been enjoying this, please do hit that thumbs up. And when it publishes, if you could just leave an emoji just to increase the engagement on my channel, gets my video in front of more people, allows my channel to grow, increases the likelihood that I'll keep doing this in the future. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really appreciated your questions and your comments. It was really great to see some of you whom I haven't seen in over a year. I miss you guys. Okay, everyone, until the next time, if that's in 11 hours, stay creative, and I wish you all the luck in your own historical creative endeavors. Good night, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.